and Israel have launched attacks on Iran. President Donald Trump has described it as major combat operations in Iran. He urged Iranians, once the attacks are over, to take over the government. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the operation would remove what he described as an existential threat posed by Iran. The BBC's Joe Inwood reports.
Huge plumes of smoke could be seen rising into the sky over central Tehran. There are reports of loud explosions and fighter jets can be heard overhead. Explosions have also been reported in the holy city of Qom, Kermanshah in the west, and Isfahan. This was the result of what Israel's defense minister said was a preemptive attack against threats to his country. The US president confirmed they were joint strikes. He posted an 8-minute video on social media.
We are going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. It will be totally, again, obliterated. We're going to annihilate their navy. We're going to ensure that the region's terrorist proxies can no longer destabilize the region or the world.
Iran has promised a swift and crushing response against not just Israel, but US bases across the region.
Defense forces around the Middle East say retaliatory strikes have been launched by Iran. The United Arab Emirates state news agency says one person has been killed in the capital Abu Dhabi after Iranian missiles were intercepted. And Qatar says it has downed missiles targeting the country, and blasts have been heard in the capital, Doha. Waikato University international law professor Alexander Gillespie says there'll be no third-party intervention beyond the countries involved in the conflict. Professor Gillespie says there could be a vicious exchange of missiles between Israel, Iran, the United States, and against US assets. He says it's possible there could also be an uprising in Iran amongst those involved in recent protests. There are 23 New Zealanders registered on safe travel in Iran and 62 in Israel. A 65-year-old man has been remanded in custody after appearing in court over a serious stabbing in central Auckland. 2 people were injured in the attack in front of the Central City Library last night. The accused appeared in Auckland District Court shortly after midday on 2 charges of causing grievous bodily harm. No pleas were entered, and Justice of the Peace Karen Avery granted him interim name suppression. More than 100 people have gathered at St Matthew's Church in central Auckland for a meeting on solutions to homelessness in the city. It comes after the government announced its controversial move-on orders last weekend. Anne-Marie Searchfield from community development organisation Lifewise told the crowd vulnerable people will be pushed further away from help and trust will be further eroded. Auckland City Missioner Helen Robinson, Danielle Legale from community food provider Sunday Blessings, and Auckland Central MP Chloe Swarbrick also spoke at the event. And that's the news.
Kia ora, Pilina Lau here from Culture 101. This week on the show, Australian comedian Joel Creasy on getting his start in New York after Joan Rivers took him under her wing. Following Penny Pati's journey from Samoa to Sole Mio fame, documentary director Rebecca Tansley. And I'm in Wellington for the Aotearoa Festival of the Arts as it kicks off. That's Culture 101 from midday Sunday on RNZ National.
Short forecast now from mid-service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Scattered showers, mainly afternoon and evening, when some may be heavy. Possible thunderstorms in the north and west. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, isolated showers clearing this evening and mainly fine. A few showers redeveloping tomorrow afternoon with possible thunderstorms in Hawke's Bay. Whanganui to Wellington, also Wairarapa, generally fine but isolated showers tomorrow morning. Tomorrow evening, rain spreading north. Nelson and Buller to Westland, cloudy periods and a few showers tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, rain spreading north tomorrow, possibly heavy. Otago, Southland and Portland, the odd shower tonight about the south coast. Morning rain tomorrow, then showers. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd shower. Rain late tomorrow, briefly heavy. 11:05, Vicky Mackay will have news and weather again at midnight. And now a change from the advertised program. As you have no doubt heard on the news through the night, the US and Israel have launched what Donald Trump has described as major combat operations on Iran. To keep us up with that for the foreseeable future, we'll be listening to the BBC.
Many died. Iranian forces killed and maimed hundreds of American service members in Iraq. The regime's proxies have continued to launch countless attacks against American forces stationed in the Middle East in recent years, as well as U.S. naval and commercial vessels and international shipping lanes. It's been mass terror, and we're not going to put up with it any longer. From Lebanon to Yemen and Syria to Iraq, the regime has armed, trained, and funded terrorist militias that have soaked the earth with blood and guts. And it was Iran's proxy, Hamas, that launched the monstrous October 7th attacks on Israel, slaughtering more than 1,000 innocent people, including 46 Americans, while taking 12 of our citizens hostage. It was brutal. Something like the world has never seen before. Iran is the world's #1 state sponsor of terror and just recently killed tens of thousands of its own citizens on the street as they protested. It has always been the policy of the United States, in particular my administration, that this terrorist regime can never have a nuclear weapon. I'll say it again. They can never have a nuclear weapon. That is why in Operation Midnight Hammer last June, we obliterated the regime's nuclear program at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. After that attack, we warned them never to resume their malicious pursuit of nuclear weapons, and we sought repeatedly to make a deal. We tried. They wanted to do it. They didn't want to do it. Again, they wanted to do it. They didn't want to do it. They didn't know what was happening. They just wanted to practice evil. But Iran refused, just as it has for decades and decades. They've rejected every opportunity to renounce their nuclear ambitions, and we can't take it anymore. Instead, they attempted to rebuild their nuclear program and to continue developing long-range missiles that can now threaten our very good friends and allies in Europe, our troops stationed overseas, and could soon reach the American homeland. Just imagine how emboldened this regime would be if they ever had and actually were armed with nuclear weapons as a means to deliver their message. For these reasons, the United States military is undertaking a massive and ongoing operation to prevent this very wicked, radical dictatorship from threatening America and our core national security interests. We're going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. It will be totally, again, obliterated. We're going to annihilate their navy. We're going to ensure that the region's terrorist proxies can no longer destabilize the region or the world.
President Trump there, we've been reporting on what's been happening in terms of the wider region, and the AFP news agency is just reporting that Jordan has now shot down 2 ballistic missiles targeting their kingdom. Let's speak to our correspondent John Donison, who is in Jerusalem and can bring us the latest from there. John, what's happening across Israel where there is now a state of emergency and sirens sounding across many regions there?
Well, within the last hour, we've had sirens, every 10 minutes or so, and we've had explosions directly overhead here in Jerusalem. Israel's missile defense system shooting down projectiles further to the west on the coast in Israel's biggest city, Tel Aviv, and then also in Haifa. We know that there have been explosions there. Not sure whether any of those missiles managed to get through. Pretty clear that Iran's retaliation, which it says it will be crushing, has begun.
And tell us what Prime Minister Netanyahu has told his country about why they are doing this and now, and what the end goal is.
Well, he says that Iran poses an existential threat to Israel, and the end goal is eliminating that threat, and what Israel would like to see is a change of regime in Iran. Now, when you listen to that 8-minute address from President Trump, It was interesting. Towards the end, he said, when we are finished, he wants the Iranian people to rise up and seize their government, saying it was a once-in-a-generation opportunity for them, to paraphrase. So it does not seem at the moment like this is going to be a limited operation by the Americans and the Israelis to put pressure on Iran to maybe make concessions in those nuclear talks that we thought were ongoing. It seems like it's more than that, and this could be a campaign that lasts several days, in effect, a war.
And that's something, a message that Prime Minister Netanyahu has reiterated as well. Speaking to the Iranian people, he said he wanted to create the conditions for them to change their destiny. What do you understand by that? And when we talk about regime change, what that could look like? Because, of course, at the top of the regime is the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, who we understand has now gone into hiding, according to reports. But there are many layers of that regime that enforce his wishes.
Yeah, and the truth is you're not going to get regime change in Iran simply by carrying out airstrikes, no matter how extensive those strikes are. You can do a lot of damage, you can damage Iran's military capabilities, but in order to get regime change, you're either going to need boots on the ground. That seems very unlikely to me. But what it does require is for the Iranian people to rise up and take power. Now, that is something that so far, despite relatively large-scale protests that we've seen in recent months in Iran, that's something that they've not really come close to doing. It's something they've never been able to achieve in the past, but it's something that clearly the Americans and the Israelis think that by carrying out these strikes, it could create the conditions where the Iranian people feel able to do so.
Just reading, John, as we talk to you, the Reuters news agency saying that Iran's Supreme Leader Khamenei and the Iran President Pezeshkian were both targeted in US-Israeli airstrikes. The results of the strikes are unclear. This is reported from an Israeli official. So as we talk about regime change, it's clear, according to this report on Reuters, that they are very much targeting, with their attacks, the Supreme Leader and the Prime Minister, and the President, rather.
Yeah, that's not something I've seen. It's not something I can confirm. But if the Israelis and the Americans were trying to take out the Supreme Leader, then that is obviously a massive step. It's massively inflammatory. It's not something that the Iranians are going to be able to sit back and ignore. And, you know, we have seen this retaliation has begun with missiles coming over, not just here, but to other parts of the region, as you were reporting. But I would imagine that it's just the start of it. You know, the Iranians are going to have to be calculating how do they respond to what's been done, and how do they continue to respond if this major combat operations, as President Trump has called it, continues. Because in the past, you remember that 12-day war between Israel and Iran last year, you know, you saw fairly extensive ballistic missiles being fired over to Israel, causing casualties, causing damage. Now, Iran's military capability has been massively diminished in the various exchanges of fire and conflicts between Iran, Israel and the United States over the last year or so, but it still has the capability to hit cities like Tel Aviv, to hit cities like Haifa hard. And certainly if they direct a large number of ballistic missiles at the center of Tel Aviv all at the same time, I think there is an exception within Israel that despite their incredibly capable missile defense shields, some will get through and you would end up with casualties.
Yeah, we also understand that here in the UK, the government has understandably advised against all travel to Israel and to Palestine. It's also holding an emergency COBRA meeting right now and says they stand ready to assist, but they have made it clear they haven't been involved in this joint operation. And this operation, John, it's clear from reports, has been many, many weeks in the planning, and Prime Minister Netanyahu was just in the United States in the past few weeks.
Yeah, I think it's probably been months in the planning. You know, I was actually in Jerusalem right at the start of the year, at the start of January, and then we were anticipating the possibility of American and Israeli strikes in Iran. But then the Americans, they didn't have the military hardware in place in the region to be able to do what they wanted to do. But over the recent weeks, they've shifted over a huge amount of military power to the region, to aircraft carrier groups, fighter jets, and you've got the largest military presence from the Americans in the region since the Iraq war back in 2003. So they clearly now feel that they've got their pieces in place and they can do what they want to do.
OK, John, thank you very much. We were just hearing as well that the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, have said that dozens of missiles have been fired at Israel this morning, and they have confirmed that 70,000 reservists have now been sent call-up notices. So we understand that this is obviously a fast-moving situation with many new lines coming in by the moment. But tensions between Iran and the US are rooted in decades of mistrust and have escalated dramatically in recent months. So how did we get to this point? In June 2025, Israel attacked Iran, sparking a 12-day tit-for-tat war. The US joined the conflict, attacking 3 nuclear sites as part of what it called Operation Midnight Hammer. Iran responded in kind by targeting a military base in Qatar used by US troops. In late December, protests broke out in Tehran with people angry about economic conditions. Over the following days, those protests morphed into massive anti-government demonstrations across the country. In January, President Trump called on Iranians to keep going, telling them that help is on its way. But the protests were brutally suppressed by a government crackdown, with thousands of people killed. In recent weeks, the US has sent thousands of troops and what Trump has described as an armada to the Middle East, including 2 aircraft carriers, warships and fighter jets. Well, just a reminder of those breaking news lines in the past few minutes. The Israeli Defense Forces have said that dozens of missiles have been fired at Israel this morning. They've confirmed that 70,000 reservists have been called up. The United States and Israel, we are being told via the Reuters news agency, have targeted Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and the Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian. But the results of those strikes were unclear, according to Israeli officials, and they haven't provided any additional information on that. But Donald Trump made clear that regime change was very much at the top of his agenda in his 8-minute statement on Truth Social in the past few hours. We also know that there have been strikes in several neighbouring Middle Eastern countries, including Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. We haven't heard if there have been any casualties as a result of that. The UK government has given a statement this morning as well, saying Iran must never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon, and that is why we have continually supported efforts to reach a negotiated solution. They said their immediate priority is the safety of UK nationals in the region. They are providing them with assistance. They said we do not want to see further escalation into a wider regional conflict, and we know that right now there is an emergency COBRA government meeting taking place, so of course we'll continue to update you on any new lines. But the UK is also urging citizens in Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar and the UAE to take cover. Let's bring in Mikey Kay now, military analyst from the Security Brief, who joins me. Hi Mikey, good to see you. Give us your analysis of what's happening militarily that we know of right now.
OK, so I think it's really important. First thing to say is that there's no approval by Congress. There's no UN Security Council resolution that backs this, and the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation states, have not bought into this. So this is a bilateral operation between Israel and the United States. Open source intelligence this morning indicates that we've seen Tomahawk land attack missiles going across Iraq. The Tomahawk land attack missile is a cruise missile that is launched from submarines or cruisers or destroyers, and they are likely to be part of the Gerald Ford carrier strike group, which is in the Mediterranean at the moment. And we know that because they're coming across Iraq. What does the TLAM do, the Tomahawk land attack missile? It's got a range of about 1,000 miles plus. It can put a penetrator head on the top, which means that it can be used against installations that are underground, so command and control nodes. It can be used against surface-to-air missile systems, and it can be used against airfields which have aircraft on them. That's called OCA, offensive counter-air. And what that means in terms of military doctrine is that you try and strike the aircraft on the ground before they get airborne. From the IDF, We've also seen airborne strikes. We don't know what jets they're using at the moment, but we do know that US F-22 Raptors, so the F-22 Raptor is the most advanced air-to-air aircraft in the world. It's a 5th gen, it's got stealth. They arrived in Ovda Air Base in South Israel yesterday. Started off with a package of 12 from RAF Lakenheath, where they were staging through. One aircraft went US, which meant that there were 13 there, and we're awaiting the arrival, if they haven't arrived already, of the last 13, which puts 24 F-22s inside Ovda Air Base in southern Israel. So we knew that the IDF were potentially going to do the preeminent strike. We don't know what aircraft they're using. We don't know what route they've taken in. But we know that the TLAMs are likely coming from the Mediterranean, from the Ford Carrier Strike Group.
What do you make of these reports coming from Israel that they have targeted in this operation the Supreme Leader and the President of Iran?
Well, I think we should put a bit of nuance on this. They've targeted the residence of the Supreme Leader. He is highly unlikely to be inside his residence.
But we understand that he's not.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a message. That's a message to Iran in terms of we're going to target the residents of that, and I totally understand that. Getting the Ayatollah, that's a very different beast. If we look at the Maduro operation in Venezuela and what that took in order to lift Maduro, Venezuela geographically is a much easier country to do that strike op. It's called a heli attack force strike op. The surface-to-air missile systems are much easier to soften up. The geography of getting the 160th Night Stalkers across Venezuela is way easier than any form of similar operation on the Ayatollah. So I'm not saying that the Ayatollah isn't part of one of the primary objectives or primary targets. The likely primary targets will be the Ayatollah and high-value targets inside the Iranian Guard Corps, the IRGC. But then, as we've heard Trump speaking, the other primary objectives are ballistic missile sites and the enriched uranium. The enriched uranium is a much, much harder target to engage, and we saw on Operation Midnight Hammer during the 12-day war last year. That required a number of what's called B-2 Spirit bombers, the triangular wing stealth bomber, which flew from Whitman Air Base in Missouri on a one-way mission. Took about 36 hours. And they ended up dropping what was called a GBU-57. That's called a massive ordnance penetrator. It's a 30,000-pound bomb, basically, that can only be dropped from the B-2. And 14 of those were dropped on 3 of the Iranian nuclear facilities, Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. So as one of the objectives that the US might have, which is the nuclear facilities, that is a much, much bigger operation. Trump's also talked about, and I was just come back from Geneva with Christian Fraser, we were outside with the negotiations on Thursday. The other 2 objectives that the US administration were looking at were Iranian proxies and the ballistic missile sites. Now, Iran has the most comprehensive, volume-wise and traverse-wise, it has the most diverse ballistic missile capability in the entire Middle East. So when Donald Trump is saying that they're going after the ballistic missile sites, some of those might be stationary in silos, but a lot of them are mobile. And that is an incredibly hard objective to achieve in its entirety. Will they be able to degrade them? Yeah, of course they will. Will they be able to completely annihilate them? Absolutely not, because you can move them. Now, what the F-35, which is a 5th-generation fighter that the Americans used in Venezuela, was used for, which is fascinating, but it won't be able to use for this in Iran, is it's a sensor platform. So it wasn't dropping bombs. It was sat off the Venezuelan coast, and it was using its sensors to detect where Venezuelan surface-to-air missile systems, mobile missile systems were. When those mobile systems started moving, the F-35 was using its sensor to feed back updated GPS coordinates into those TLAM missiles which would then allow to strike that. And that's not going to be, they're not going to be able to do that in Iran because Iran is 3 times the size of Iraq.
Reuters news agency is just reporting some Saudi reaction from the foreign ministry there, condemning the Iranian attacks on the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait and Jordan, as well as Saudi itself. And given that these are, Mikey, all allies of the US, they all have US bases there, which no doubt is what the Iranians are probably targeting, but we don't have direct information on exactly what those targets are.
Yeah, I think we've got a graphic actually of where the US bases are.
Yeah.
Here we go.
So they are multiple, they are widespread. What is the risk here of a wider conflagration with these countries being targeted by Iran?
Well, I think there'll definitely be communications going on between the US and Qatar. You've got Al-Udeid, so you can see Al-Udeid. Let's just basically run through. So you've got US bases in all along the Persian Gulf. You've got Iraq to the north. You've got Kuwait. As you come down, you've got Qatar. You've got the UAE. And then also there's a huge build-up of US military capability in Rafah Air Base in Jordan. So Al-Udeid is really important. It's the largest US base in the Middle East. And we can just zoom in on that. And it's got an air base, and it's got what's based there at the moment are called the KC-135 and KC-46 airborne tankers. So they can get airborne and basically provide a patrol station in the sky to sustain air operations. But it's also got the Combined Air Operations Center. It's called the KHz. And I've been in there. If you go in there, it's basically just a huge operations center that governs CENTCOM operations all across the area of responsibility for CENTCOM, which is as far west as Egypt and as far east as Kazakhstan. So it's huge. So there's significant military capability in Al-Udeid alone, and of course that's going to be one of the primary targets from Iran. All of the air bases have got potential to be targeted. So I think that's to be expected in terms of a retaliatory response. But again, conversations will be going on in terms of how this escalates.
Yeah, let me just bring in a couple of lines. The US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, are monitoring Iran operations from Mar-a-Lago, that is, of course, Donald Trump's home in Florida. And that's being reported by someone who is apparently familiar with the matter. We've also got reaction in from the EU's Ursula von der Leyen saying we call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint to protect civilians and to fully respect international law. We're also hearing that there have been several explosions heard in Abu Dhabi's near the city's main airport. Airspace has been closed across most of this region now, and travel obviously restricted. Yeah, UK's Gatwick Airport has also reporting restrictions in the Middle East. Some flights from London may experience delays or cancellations. So yeah, you can appreciate that as all of these countries are reacting around the world, and flights being cancelled and rerouted by the moment. Well, let's speak to Dr. Badar Al-Saif, an assistant professor at Kuwait University and the president of Al-Saif Consulting, who's been hearing strikes. Welcome to you. Tell us what you've been hearing.
It's our worst nightmares come true in the Gulf, Samantha, where sirens are off in Kuwait. They've been going on at it for the past few hours. Our beliefs are that we've intercepted Iranian missiles for now, and we hope that we continue to do so in the coming hours and hopefully know more of this. I mean, it just tells you how high the threat perception of Iran is to begin by hitting their closest neighbors. Granted, they think that it's the U.S. bases that they're hitting, but they're really hitting their neighbors, and those are Gulf neighbors that have been trying very hard to avert war. I mean, you saw the Omani foreign minister in the U.S. yesterday and a few days before in Geneva. The same thing has been happening by other capitals in the region. So the Gulf states don't deserve such a predicament. I think they need to focus on U.S. targets elsewhere if they were to go at that war. And, you know, it's a blow to diplomacy from all sides. This is happening as diplomacy was being pursued for the second time. The same thing happened last June, in the middle of diplomatic talks, the U.S. and Israel decided to strike. So it sends, a tough lesson for diplomacy and for watchers of diplomacy.
What's happening across Kuwait now? What's the government advising you? How are you feeling, you and your family?
I mean, look, streets are, it's a weekend, it's a long weekend. We just celebrated our National Day and Liberation Day in the past 2 days, so it's quiet because of that, but you can feel that it's even more quiet around us with the sirens off. People are bracing for the worst. We're confident that there will be measures taken to protect us. There hasn't been any casualties. We've heard of something in Jordan at the moment, so we're watching and comparing with other capitals that are being hit across the Gulf and in Jordan, and we just, we're praying for the best. Diplomacy needs to come back on track. This is not going to be solved by war.
Okay,
right? And the objective is not quite clear. It cannot.
I just want to pause you there because there's been some reaction from Donald Trump, who's given an interview with the Washington Post. I just want to bring our viewers those lines. He has said that his main concern is freedom for the Iranian people, and the US is working to make Iran a peace that is safe. He said, all I want is freedom for the people. He was asked about what he hoped his legacy would be as a result of the operation. He said, I want a safe nation, and that's what we are going to have. Doctor, let me ask you, you said that this is your worst nightmare. And Donald Trump has said it's clear he wants regime change. Would regime change make the region a safer place?
Has regime change worked in the past with the other countries around us in the region? The regime change was a platform that he went into election against in the last two, election cycles. So regime change usually comes with it regime collapse. It comes chaos, fragmentation, spillovers to other countries. It's not a straightforward answer. So to move on from the very limited goal of blocking any ambitions for being a nuclear state to negotiating proxy actions by Iran to now going to the maximalist objective of regime change is quite something. And it speaks to the threat perceptions from both sides, the Iranians and the Americans, right? They're both going at it, and that's why you're seeing all these attacks in the different Gulf states, things that we haven't seen in the last showdown last June. So that says something about where we're headed. It's unclear. There is no clear trajectory. I think there will be much more chaos down the line.
Okay, Doctor, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much for telling us what your experiences are and your analysis. And just also a report on the AFP news agency that fresh blasts have been heard in Abu Dhabi, according to residents who have spoken to that news agency. We can speak to Ahmed Bamarian now, who is the senior Iran analyst at Dawn, a foreign policy think tank focused on the Middle East. Welcome to you. Good to speak to you. What's your analysis of Donald Trump's objectives today?
President Trump, in his 8-minute address, he listed a long list of American grievances when it comes to the Iranian regime, from the revolution and chanting death to America to the hostage crisis and holding American diplomats for 440 days in captivity. Iran's missile program, Iran's nuclear program, and at the end, the regime change that he promised. Basically, what he said was that the Iranians, for now, go to their homes because there would be bombs everywhere, but they have to come and take over the government and ask the military to lay down their arms, because those who lay down their arms would be safe. But so anyways, in general, I think that he had a long list of objectives, and it was not very clear what was the exact the main objective, but it's definitely a framework regime. There's so much to be unfolded. It's a very vast, huge objective with a lot of unknowns. Right now in Tehran, I heard from people who heard bombings in different places going back to their homes, and very much curious to see what unfolds next.
How vulnerable is the regime right now, given that its proxies across the Middle East are severely weakened after the last 2.5 years, and given that there have been these mass protests last month across the country, which were brutally put down with many thousands killed, some reports of possibly tens of thousands. But there are clearly many people within the country who do want a change. How weakened do you think the leadership is?
the leadership in Iran is at its weakest position in the past few decades. As you mentioned, they have lost so much of their wings in the past 2 years in the region. Also, militarily, when it comes to the U.S. and Israel, they have a huge disadvantage. I think over the past few months, they have been, blocking about their military capacity and their power to retaliate. When it comes to the domestic situation, the Iranian regime faces a huge legitimacy crisis inside the country, particularly after the January massacre. The Iranian people, a vast majority of the Iranian people do not want this government. They killed thousands of people and many people inside the country, but desperate to get help to somehow overcome the repression machinery. So that's why we are seeing scenes that are unprecedented in recent history, that many people from the videos that have been published over the past few hours, that there are students in schools showing the smoke in the air of the attacks and are happy about the attacks. Or it shows with the frustration and the lack of legitimacy of the Iranian government, and how they make themselves so vulnerable when it comes to the Iranian people in a way that many people inside the country, they welcome any means to overcome the Islamic Republic. So yes, they have a very huge disadvantage militarily when it comes to the Iranian people domestically. They are very much in a very bad shape.
What's your analysis of what regime change may look like? Many analysts have suggested that what Donald Trump may be after is something similar to the situation in Venezuela, where he took out President Maduro but left much of the leadership in place, giving them the ultimatum, you do as I say and you can stay, otherwise it's the same for you. Is that a possible scenario in Iran, where possibly the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and the President are taken out, removed from the picture in some way, but the rest of the apparatus possibly stays in place with a maybe more moderate leader?
Yeah, as I said, there is so much unknowns in this operation. From what President Trump said, the scope of the operation, the military operation, is regime change. What they are wishing for is a regime change. What they are doing is to dismantle Iran's political leadership and command control, the military, Iran's naval capacity and all that, and provide a situation in which people, or we don't know, at some point other groups to come on to the streets and somehow the military lay out their arms, and we have a collapse of the regime. But this is, we have to see what's we don't know much about the endurance of the regime. We don't know how the regime has prepared for this situation, because in June 2025, the Iranian regime was caught by surprise. Right now, I think for the past 8 months, they have been waiting for this moment, so there is much more readiness for this moment. We have to see how these attacks unfold in the next few hours, next few days, and then the readiness of the Iranian regime. But regimes like the Islamic Republic are much weaker than what they project, and so it might be. So we're going to start the next few days, but I think it's anybody who predicts, based on what President Trump said, that this is what they want, but whether they can achieve it, we have to see in the next few days.
Ahmed, I also want to ask you about any potential new leader. We've heard lots in recent months from the son of the late Shah, Reza Pahlavi, and possible support for him, but he hasn't lived in the country for more than 45 years. How much support do you think there is in Iran for him, and who could a potential leader, who could people rally around in the form of a potential new leader?
As you mentioned, he has not been in the country for the past 47 years. And when the situation is very volatile and there's a chaos and there's a vacuum of power, then it really matters who's on the ground, who has the organization, who has the military and power and the network. And all those elements really matter when it comes to a very fragile moment. at this point, he has support definitely within Iran. He has a lot of support within Iran, but that support has to be transferred to organization, to a movement that can take over institutions and claim victory. At this point, we don't know how much that is a feasible option, and whether this is an option that the U.S. is going after. But we have to see how these forces come together in the next few days. Definitely. You have to see a fraction within this establishment in the next few days by dismantling the leadership or by removing some of these political leaders from the scene. There might be a vacuum in the power, and other people come to the scene. But in general, I would say we are in the very, very early stages of this conflict, and it's very unclear the direction it's headed. There are so many different scenarios, but at the moment, when we get to that moment, it really matters who's on the ground, who has power, who has the army, who has the guns, and how much the core of the Islamic Republic fractured. How much of that, we see the split, and there's a fracture. If there's a fracture within the regime, that I think would be very significant. If there is a fracture, then that could escalate other developments.
Ahmed Mamarian, thank you very much for bringing us your analysis. Just some new lines coming in, reported on the Reuters news agency from Iran's IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Corps there, saying that all Israel and US bases in the region have been struck by the powerful blows of Iranian missiles. They said this operation will continue relentlessly until the enemy is decisively defeated. Let's speak now to our correspondent David Willard, who is in Washington. David, welcome to you. And Donald Trump has given a few comments to the Washington Post. Bring us up to date.
Yes, that's right, Samantha. A short while ago, he said that his main intention was freedom for the Iranian people, as he put it, and that was the intention with these strikes on Iran. But it is, of course, worth remembering that Donald Trump was elected on a promise to steer clear of so-called forever wars. He was critical of one of his Republican presidential predecessors, George W. Bush, for getting embroiled in the long-running conflict in Iraq. And indeed, the previous attack on Iran, Operation Midnight Hammer back in June, was much more of a surgical strike aimed at taking out 3 nuclear facilities in Iran. Well, now President Trump has put the United States into a position where it is involved in a massive and ongoing operation, as he put it, in that country, and also President Trump warning the American people of the possibility of U.S. casualties. This, of course, all without any approval on the part of Congress, and we've already heard from the Republican Congressman Thomas Massey, who wrote on X, of war unauthorized by Congress, his characterization of the strikes on Iran that we've seen in the last few hours, Samantha.
And what reaction, how soon can we expect any reaction from Republicans, from Democrats, from the American people who, as you talked about, will no doubt not want to be drawn into a potential long-term conflict?
Well, the word of these strikes came about after 2 o'clock in the morning here in Washington, D.C. It's now, 5:42 in the morning, so Americans will be waking up in the next few hours to this news, and it has prompted reaction from some Republicans that is favorable to Donald Trump, although Lindsey Graham, the senator, also made the point in a long post on X as to the men and women participating in this operation for our country and Israel. May God bless and keep you safe if you are injured or fall. I believe with all my heart that your sacrifice makes your country and the world a better and safer place. So reinforcing Donald Trump's suggestion that this is not potentially without American casualties, the Democrat Senator John Fetterman in the last hour or so coming to the support of Donald Trump, though, on this, saying that Mr. Trump has been willing to do what is right and necessary to produce real peace in the region. So it'll be very interesting, Samantha, to see what other reaction we get, as I say, in the next hour or so, as people here on the East Coast wake up to this news.
David, I know you'll keep us up to date for now. Thank you. Let's speak to Chatham House's Middle East Director, Sanam Vakil. Sanam, welcome to you. The US and Israel launched this attack and Iran calling it a major combat operation. This comes after weeks of tensions in the region, a huge US military build-up. Was it, do you think, to some extent expected?
Yes, it was expected. I think that the Iranians were certainly negotiating in the hope of obtaining a deal, but certainly also preparing for this war. And we know this because their response has been rather quick. The strikes began this morning around the 6 o'clock hour here. And by 10 o'clock, the Iranians began striking back against Israel as well as U.S. military facilities across the Gulf. So they are prepared. They've also got plans to replace the chain of command. And I think they're expecting a long and drawn-out conflict.
And what's your analysis of this military operation? We've heard that the Supreme Leader and the President of Iran have been targeted. The distinctions being made about whether or not it was their locations, whether their homes that have been targeted or directly themselves. We understand the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is not in his official residence. He has moved elsewhere. Is that, we already have heard from the President that regime change is what he wants. How achievable do you think that will be?
Well, I think that the Islamic Republic and its leadership have known quite from the last round of war seen in June of 2025 that both Israel and the United States, if they're going for another round, are not just trying to bring Iran back to the negotiating table for a better deal. This second war is about decapitating the regime and seeing what comes next and hoping perhaps that a system will be more pliant and pliable for the United States and Israel as well. Taking out the Iranian Supreme Leader was attempted, I think, also in the last war. He is certainly underground and has been for quite some time now. There are suggestions that he will make some sort of speech to show proof of life, but also to show that there are plans and a command structure underway. In the June 2025 war, it was made public that there are names on a list in case he is killed. Ali Khamenei, I think, would rather go down as a martyr. He has been leader of the Islamic Republic since 1989 than submit to President Trump in what is very clearly a regime change operation, and one that won't be easy to achieve. But I certainly would say that the Islamic Republic, after the coming days and weeks, and we don't know how long this is going to go on for, will not look the same.
I'm just reading from BBC Persian an update that numerous explosions have been heard in Tehran, and the office of Iran's Supreme Leader and the presidential office in Tehran have been targeted. Military sites have been targeted as well in Kermanshah, Qom, Isfahan, Tabriz, Karaj. The Israeli Defense Force has warned Iranian civilians to evacuate areas near military sites and installations ahead of those strikes. And last year in the 12-day war, there were a number of Iranians who were killed in those strikes, and there was, to some extent, a certain amount of rallying around the flag of people coming out in defence of their country, if not the regime. Do you perhaps foresee that happening in this scenario, or is that shifted exponentially because of the huge protests in January?
I don't think we can have these sort of zero-sum takeaways. Because Iranians didn't come out to protest during the 12-day war last summer didn't mean that they were wholly in favor of the Islamic Republic. And despite these protests doesn't mean that we just saw in January that Iranians are wholly against a foreign war against Iran. I think certainly people are not going to be protesting while missiles and bombs are raining down across the country. We have to see if the United States is able to dismantle this regime This regime is institutionalized, it's bureaucratized, it's been in power for almost 5 decades. So if there is fragmentation at the elite level, if the military chooses to break away and people join together, that is what we should be looking for. But I don't expect that it will happen a couple hours after a military operation has begun. It will happen when the bombs stop and people are given space and agency to be involved in what comes next.
The Saudi government have condemned what it called Iranian aggression against the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait and Jordan. The UAE has said that one person has been killed by debris after Iranian missiles were intercepted. What is the potential wider implications for the region?
Well, it's not potential. It's happening in real time. We have seen Iran immediately, as fast as it could, launch missiles across the region, targeting Israel specifically, but also military bases across the Gulf states. This is no surprise. The Iranians have been saying over the past weeks and even days that would be their military response. This is an existential moment for the Islamic Republic. They are fighting for their survival, and the only way that they can survive the onslaught of a U.S. and an Israeli attack, which is simultaneous, is to quickly export this war across the region to destabilize as many countries as possible, and to make this not just a U.S., Israel, Iran war, but to make this a consequential war for the wider Middle East.
But presumably because they have U.S. bases, they are U.S. allies, their allegiance lies with the U.S., with Israel, despite how complicated the region is.
I wouldn't make these sort of, again, black or white assessments. The region is the one, all of the countries of the Middle East are now heavily involved, and their populations are deeply worried. This is equally existential for people to see drones and missiles flying over their airspace. People will die, and it won't just be Iranians or Americans or Israelis. Gulf states have, of course, long hosted U.S. air bases and military facilities, hoping that those facilities would protect them from Iranian or broader attacks, and we're seeing the balance change in the region. Threat perceptions definitely change in the region. The Gulf states do not want to be dragged into this war, try to lobby against this war, appeal to President Trump to pursue the path of diplomacy, and here we are again facing a broader and much more dangerous war that won't be limited just to Iran and the Iranian people. And certainly over the past year, if not two, particularly when Qatar itself was struck by Iran and Israel in 2025, Gulf states made clear that they didn't just see Iran as a regional destabilizer, but also began to see Israel as a regional destabilizer, a country that continued to strike Lebanon, Syria, but also the Gulf states. So we have to understand the nuance here and appreciate the danger of this war and the impact of this war across the Middle East.
Sanam, thank you. Well, let's bring in Mikey Kay, military analyst from the Security Brief. Mikey, welcome. Just in the past few minutes, Reuters is reporting a response from Kuwait, which says it reserves the right to defend itself after the Iranian attack. So let's pick up on that point that Sanam was making there about the potentials for a wider conflagration.
Yeah, I mean, look at the moment, it's about defending the basis, is about defending territory. And the big question for me is, Iran has a massively diverse ballistic missile capability with volume. And the big question I've got is, sort of in my own mind, is what are the stockpiles that Iran has? And then, as a consequence of that, it's what capability, how much stockpiles on Patriot missile systems, which are anti-ballistic missile, cruise missile systems, and THAAD, which is terminal high altitude air defense. Now, these systems have been put into the region as part of this US military buildup, but there'll be only so many stockpiles that THAAD and Patriot have. And then obviously that translates to Israel's Iron Dome. And Iron Dome is a three-tiered layered defense system that uses the Tamir missile out to 40 kilometers, David's Sling out to 300 kilometers, and then what's called the Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 missiles out to 2,000 kilometers. And the Arrow 3 can actually intercept ballistic missiles outside of the atmosphere. So the big guessing game at the moment is how many stockpiles do all of these bases within the region have, including Israel's Iron Dome, and what can Iran, ballistic missile-wise, throw at those bases. Now, that's just a small part of where the potential threat comes from. We cover this, by the way. We did a whole security brief with Christian Fraser, which went onto YouTube yesterday. It's a 20-minute piece that covers all of this. So the viewers, if they want more information, can go onto YouTube because we cover all of these eventualities. But Iran just doesn't have ballistic missiles. It's got a very comprehensive, what's called one-way attack drone threat, and that's the Shahed 136. So when Iran decides that, or if it decides that the air bases, the US air bases in the region have been struck, if Iran decides to then start launching drones, and you'll ask what would they launch drones at? Well, the US have two carriers now in the region. It's called the Gerald Ford, which is in the Mediterranean, and its carrier strike group, and that's likely where the Tomahawk ground attack missiles came from to launch the initial strike this morning. But it's also got the Abraham Lincoln, which is in the region as well. And the latest information we have on that is that carrier strike group, if you can see on the map, in the bottom right-hand region, it's Oman. That's where that's going to be based off. So that's an important part of the equation.
Mikey, thank you very much for taking us through all that. And I just have plenty more on the security brief. Well, earlier we spoke to Jeremy Bowen, our international editor, for his analysis on how this may all play out.
First of all, the answer is we don't know what's going to happen because we've now gone into a very unpredictable period. There were reports early on that the Israelis were saying this might last 4 days. Well, it's not really up to them. If the Iranians want to continue sending missiles, if they have the capacity to do that, I think the way potentially that this plays out is that there is a very big onslaught lasting a number of days. They do an awful lot of damage. And then if what they are trying to do is to decapitate the Islamic regime, well, they might not succeed in that because, of course, they will also have, like the Americans have been, and the Israelis, who have been told to go to their shelters. I think you'll find that senior people in the regime will be doing that too, because they will be aware that something like this would have been about to happen. And the messages coming from Donald Trump and from Benjamin Netanyahu is that once we've finished with this, Iranian people, your hour of freedom is at hand. Well, it is a terrible regime, clearly, in Iran, a regime that is happy to send its men onto the streets, as happened earlier on in the year, to kill probably, as far as we know, thousands of people who were protesting against them. Well, those people, those protesters will be thinking, well, I think they'll probably do that again if we try. So that is a sense of deterrence for them in doing that sort of thing. And another thing to recall is that the Iranian regime is highly ideological. The Shah was overthrown a long time ago now, in 1979, and they've been there. And they do have followers. It's not like the whole country is against them. They have supporters who believe in what they're doing and believe in the Islamic regime. And most important of all, they have security forces who, it has been proven time after time, are prepared to go into the streets to shoot their fellow citizens, to kill them for protesting against the regime. So while the regime is suffering from a massive economic crisis caused principally by sanctions, and while it's under huge external pressure, even before these airstrikes started a few hours ago, in terms of its own internal cohesion and capacity to inflict pain on its internal enemies, it does appear to retain that capacity. Maybe the point of the airstrikes is to try to eliminate that capacity, but trying to do things from long range is really difficult. The regime change from the air hasn't happened. when it's happened, when regimes have been overthrown, and I'm thinking about the Libyan regime, Colonel Gaddafi, 2011, Saddam Hussein, 2003, there's been men on the ground who've been fighting to start with, and also what followed was not some kind of a peaceful transition into liberal democracy and freedom and human rights for all. What happened was collapse. The collapse of those states, the collapse of those countries into failed states. More than 20 years on, Iraq is still dealing with the consequences of that. And as for Libya, well, Libya's in pieces. It has a couple of different governments. It has city-states that are pretty much self-governing. It has militias all over the place. And that's something that happened 15 years ago after the collapse of the Gaddafi regime. And Iran is a much bigger, in terms of population, country than that. So there are all kinds of imponderables ahead, and I'm not so sure how hard Donald Trump has thought about all of this. And if the Israelis have thought about it, well, I think that they have their own reasons for wanting to go ahead with this. Netanyahu, for many years, has said
RNZ News at midnight. Morena, good morning. I'm Vicky Mackay. Donald Trump says the United States and Iran have begun what the president calls major combat operations in Iran. Israel has launched a national alert after Iran launched missiles in reprisal. The ABC's Larry Buttrose has more.
Explosions have rocked northern Israel as it works to intercept incoming Iranian missiles after launching a nationwide attack on Iran with the United States. The blasts echoed just after the Israeli military said it would be using its air defense systems to bring down the Iranian missiles. There's no immediate word yet on any damage or casualties from the ongoing attack. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is vowing Iran must not be allowed to develop nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has acknowledged the operations against Iran may lead to US casualties, saying that often happens in war.
In a pre-recorded video uploaded to Truth Social, Donald Trump has accused Iran of turning away from a peaceful resolution.
They've rejected every opportunity to renounce their nuclear ambitions, and we can't take it anymore. Instead, they attempted to rebuild their nuclear program and to continue developing long-range missiles.
Meanwhile, Iran says its army chief, Major General Amir Hatami, is safe and actively commanding the armed forces. And the Revolutionary Guards have just issued a statement saying Tehran's retaliation will continue relentlessly until the enemy is decisively defeated. As well as the explosions in northern Israel, blasts have been heard in Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Iran has previously threatened to attack US air bases in those countries. In other news, the Association of Salaried Medical Specialists is calling for clinicians to be consulted before introducing digital technology. The Health Minister, Simeon Brown, has announced that every emergency department in the country now has access to an artificial intelligence scribe tool. Mr. Brown says 80% of surveyed staff at Auckland's Middlemore Emergency Department say it's improved productivity or efficiency. But Association Vice President Dr. Sylvia Boyes says it is really important for there to be clinical engagement before anything is rolled out.
So that what's introduced is helpful rather than a hindrance and continues to improve workflows and improve patient care.
Dr. Boyes says clinicians are wary of new technology, especially in the wake of recent health data breaches. The government has stripped Andrew Mountbatten Windsor of a special medal given to mark the 150th anniversary of the Treaty of Waitangi. The New Zealand 1990 Commemoration Medal was given to members of the royal family as well as more than 3,000 New Zealanders. A spokesperson for the Prime Minister said Andrew's name has now been removed from the register of recipients. In October, Andrew said he no longer intended to use the honours conferred on him following revelations of his link to the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Retailers say businesses can make the necessary changes now that new rules on gift card expiry dates have been clarified. In less than 2 weeks, businesses will have to give shoppers at least 3 years to use gift cards.
Retail NZ Chief Executive Caroline Young says the Commission has decided how some promotions will be affected.
What we've found is that, there are some situations where if a business is doing a promotion, alongside that promotion, if you purchase an item and you get a gift card with that gift card will be subject to the 3-year expiry.
Caroline Young says gift cards related to loyalty programs will also fall under new rules. And in sport, in Super Rugby, fixtures are from Saturday. The Hurricanes were defeated by the Fijian Ndrua in Lautoka 25-20. The Chiefs went down to the Crusaders, the Chiefs at home, 43-33. And the Brumbies have just beaten the Blues 30-27. Repeating our lead news story, Donald Trump says the United States and Iran have begun what the president calls major combat operations in Iran. Israel has launched a national alert after Iran launched missiles in reprisal. And Iran says its Army Chief Major General Amir Hatami is safe and actively commanding the armed forces. The Revolutionary Guards have issued a statement saying Tehran's retaliation will continue relentlessly until the enemy is decisively defeated. In just a moment, I'll have the very latest in weather.
In New Zealand's Jewel in the Crown Marine Reserve, a native species is taking over.
They basically just go around, pick everything off the reef.
But could we? Should we intervene?
Things are changing, and they're changing because of us, so I think we need to be part of addressing them as well.
This week on Our Changing World, the spiky problem of the long-spined urchin, and a management trial that's currently underway. Listen anytime on your favourite podcast app, or Tuesdays, 7:30 p.m. on RNZ National.
Thank you. The short forecast from Met Service to midnight Ratapu Sunday. The first day of March, the Ides of March. Northland partly cloudy with a few showers. Thunderstorms possible this afternoon and evening. Auckland, Waikato, Bay of Plenty, Rotorua, Coromandel, Taranaki, Taumarunui and Taihape, partly cloudy. Scattered showers in the west, spreading everywhere in the afternoon and clearing in the evening. For Taupo Nui Aotea, Tairāwhiti, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a fine morning, then a few showers from afternoon with thunderstorms possible inland. For Whanganui to Wellington, also wided up and mainly fine with isolated showers this morning, then rain spreading north in the evening. For Nelson and Buller to Westland, cloudy periods and a few showers. For Marlborough and Canterbury, rain spreads north today, possibly heavy. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, a period of rain this morning followed by showers. And in the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd shower turning to rain this evening, possibly heavy. I'll have more news and weather again at 1 on RNZ National 101. It is 6.5 minutes past midnight as we return now to the BBC for live coverage from there of the US and Israel having launched attacks on Iran and the Iranians responding.
Thousands of its own citizens on the street as they protested. It has always been the policy of the United States, in particular, my administration, that this terrorist regime can never have a nuclear weapon. I'll say it again. They can never have a nuclear weapon. That is why in Operation Midnight Hammer last June, we obliterated the regime's nuclear program at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. After that attack, we warned them never to resume their malicious pursuit of nuclear weapons, and we sought repeatedly to make a deal. We tried. They wanted to do it. They didn't want to do it. Again, they wanted to do it. They didn't want to do it. They didn't know what was happening. They just wanted to practice evil. But Iran refused, just as it has for decades and decades. They've rejected every opportunity to renounce their nuclear ambitions, and we can't take it anymore. Instead, they attempted to rebuild their nuclear program and to continue developing long-range missiles that can now threaten our very good friends and allies in Europe, our troops stationed overseas, and could soon reach the American homeland. Just imagine how emboldened this regime would be if they ever had and actually were armed with nuclear weapons as a means to deliver their message. For these reasons, the United States military is undertaking a massive and ongoing operation to prevent this very wicked, radical dictatorship from threatening America and our core national security interests. We're going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. It will be totally, again, obliterated. We're going to annihilate their Navy. We're going to ensure that the region's terrorist proxies can no longer destabilize the region or the world.
Well, that was President Trump there. In the last few seconds, we've heard from the UAE Defense Ministry. They have said that one person has been killed in those retaliatory Iranian strikes. Well, you are with BBC News with continuing coverage of this breaking news story. The US and Israel have carried out a joint attack on Iran as Tehran launches retaliatory strikes against other countries in the surrounding region. And in the last few minutes, we've had confirmation from the Defense Ministry in the United Arab Emirates that one person has been killed in those retaliatory strikes by Iran. We'll give you more on that as and when we get it. But let's now cross live to our correspondents around the world. Joining me now are John Donison in Jerusalem, David Willis in Washington, and Barbara Plett-Usher in Doha. And also we have Bahman Kalbasi from BBC Persian, who is in New York. Let's now speak, if we can, live to John Donison in Jerusalem. And John, just bring us up to date with the reaction from Israel and also what we are hearing in terms of those missiles being sent to Israel from Iran.
Certainly over the last few hours, clear evidence that Iran's retaliation has begun. We've had the sound of sirens every 10-15 minutes. We've seen explosions directly overhead our hotel here in Jerusalem, which looked like Israel's missile defense system shooting down projectiles being fired from Iran. And then further to the west, in the big cities of Tel Aviv and Haifa, more explosions there. No word yet on any casualties, on any damage. Israel's missile defense shield is pretty effective. We don't know if any of those missiles got through, but I certainly don't think it's the end of it. And the language we're getting from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and that 8-minute address, you played some of it from President Trump, you get the sense that this is not a limited operation. It's going to go on for some time, and if it does, Iran is likely to respond further.
Let's talk a little bit, if we can, John, about Israeli public opinion, given that obviously we've just come out in terms of Israel of a prolonged war in Gaza. Is there an appetite, do you think, amongst Israeli people for what could potentially be a continuing war with Iran?
I think Israel is very much a divided country. There's been a division and opposition to the war in Gaza, that what went on for more than 2 years. We had the war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, more support for that. I think to say there's an appetite is wrong, really, but there is a kind of weary acceptance that Israel, as they often like to say, lives in a very hostile neighborhood, and I think many Israelis feel that some sort of action, some sort of conflict with Iran was inevitable. That's not to say that they welcome it. You know, people are tired of war. It's been hugely damaging to the economy here. People have been running for the shelter across Israel. Schools are now going to be closed. The airspace is closed. No flights coming in. So, you know, there's not an appetite for it, but I think they accept that, you know, the kind of conflict between Iran and Israel has never gone away, and at some point it was going to flare up.
John, thank you very much indeed. John Donison there in Jerusalem. We'll come back to John a little bit later to get a bit more about reaction in Israel. Let's cross live now and speak to Barbara Plett-Usher, who is in Doha. And Barbara, we've been hearing from the Defense Ministry in the UAE that one person has been killed in Iranian strikes. What more do we know about that and about these retaliatory strikes in the region?
Well, this is the exact outcome that the regional leaders have worked very hard to try to prevent. Over the last 2 months, they have put all of their efforts into trying to mediate a diplomatic outcome, a diplomatic channel for negotiations.
but they have failed clearly, and now they are being attacked by Iran, which is what Iran had threatened to do, because the Arab Gulf states do host U.S. military bases, 13 of them throughout the region, with tens of thousands of troops. So here in Qatar, we've had several rounds of explosions that we've heard. The Qataris said that they have been shooting the incoming missiles, that they've intercepted them, that so far there hasn't been any damage. And the target clearly is the Al Udeid air base. This is the biggest military base that the U.S. has in the region. It's the headquarters for Central Command. Also, as you mentioned, in the United Arab Emirates, they have been shooting the missiles coming in, again saying that they're intercepting them, but we have heard this announcement, first from the state news agency, now from the defense minister, that one person has been killed. We don't have the details about the circumstances, but that's the first casualty that we have heard. There had been some reports that there were also casualties in Iraq, which has again received Iranian missiles because there are U.S. bases there. And in Bahrain, which is the headquarters of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, it's a naval base. The Bahrainis have said that Iranian missiles have struck the base. Again, we don't have details yet on the damage, but what we're seeing is that the Iranians are making good on the threats that they were issuing before the attacks of Israel and the United States started. They have, in the past, been fairly calibrated, quite calibrated in their response to any kind of attack, and trying not to escalate, but they had been signaling very strongly this time that they wouldn't do that, that they would respond not only by attacking Israel, but by attacking the U.S. military bases in the region, attacking their neighbors.
We've heard from Kuwait in the last few minutes, the foreign ministry, saying Kuwait reserves the right to defend itself after Iranian attacks. We've also heard from Jordan. Jordan has said, government spokesman has said, Jordan will defend its interests with all its might. We're getting a reaction from these regional players, but how far are they willing to be pushed before they do start wanting to defend themselves and their interests, do you think?
I think that they would be very careful about making a decision to strike back. I think that they will, their focus right now is going to be to intercept the missiles coming in. They have been very worried about the impact of this kind of conflict, especially the kind that President Trump and the Israelis have announced, which is essentially to try to get regime change. It's targeting the regime, which means that the Iranian authorities will feel that they're under existential threat and might have a more fierce response than they would otherwise. The concerns have been that the Iranians will target not just the military bases, but they may end up targeting infrastructure in the Arab countries, especially the oil and gas infrastructure on which this region depends. The concern also is wider than that, that if there is regime change, if the state does collapse in Iran, the consequences are unknown. There are various options that could happen. That was just another explosion we've heard there as the Qataris are shooting at the missile, intercepting the missiles coming in. The possibility could be in Iran that the state would collapse. And, you know, the countries around here have seen that happen in Iraq. They've seen that happen in Syria. They know that there are refugees. They know that there could be weapons flows. So there's a great deal of concern of what this might lead to. And I think all of the capitals here, all of the leaders will take decisions to defend themselves from the incoming missiles. And it would be a very careful calculation about whether it would serve their interests to actually strike back.
Barbara, thank you very much indeed. I want to bring audiences some breaking lines that have been coming into us from inside Iran, and this is from the governor of Minab County. Now, just to give you a little bit of background, Minab County is in southern Iran. It's extremely close to Bandar Abbas, which is a very important strategic port city by the Gulf. At least 24 people, their reports, have been killed in Israeli strikes on a school in the county of Minab. That is what we are getting from the Tasnim news agency. They have been in touch with the governor of Minab County. So that latest line coming into us from inside Iran. Of course, we find it very difficult
verify what we're hearing from Iran, but that has been reported. Let's bring in, if we can, at this point, Bahman Kalbasi from BBC Persian, who is in New York. I know, Bahman, you're getting this information as I am getting it, but can you just bring me a little bit more about what we're hearing from inside Iran?
Well, one of the earliest pictures that we received was obviously locations inside in Tehran, close to where the Supreme Leader's office is, a presidential office. That area was targeted extensively. And then other parts of the city, and I got footage from family and friends who were looking at mountains in different directions in Tehran, and there were explosions there as well. And then immediately after, obviously more footage of partly panicked residents running from locations that were targeted, but also in different parts, including a school, maybe a high school or middle school, where the classmates were celebrating and saying it just finally happened. There's another street that we saw people being happy about what is going on. So there's mixed reaction in the public. Obviously, many worried about the consequences of this, but some hoping that this will bring the regime down. And then the government, in various statements, have announced a complete closure of schools and universities and reduced services by the government, but also ensuring that, trying to assure the public that there's enough food, not to rush the grocery stores, and bring a level of calm. Obviously, this will depend on how intense these attacks are in residential areas, around residential areas, especially after we heard from Israeli officials telling the residents to try to stay away or move out of areas that are close to military sites. This is a difficult task that we saw in that 12-day war as well, that residents were asking, we don't know if there is a military site next to us or a government. Not all of these are well marked, and so there was a level of worry and panic there as well. So all of this is really very early on. This was first thing in the morning. People were taking their kids to school. It was the beginning of workday, and these attacks started. So obviously now a lot of people staying in and not going out. We heard from President Trump telling Iranian people not to shelter in, not to venture out, because this will go on for some time. And he said bombs will be dropping everywhere. So that is obviously a source of worry for a lot of residents, and not wanting to be, caught in the crossfire.
Let me just interrupt you briefly there, because we're seeing now pictures of smoke in Tehran, in the capital, rising from behind buildings. Clearly we're hearing that targets have been military and political targets, but there, as often is the case with these types of events, will be collateral damage. There'll be potentially people who are hurt. You mentioned earlier about fear within Iran, the balance of fear versus a desire to see the end of the regime. Where do you think that balance lies?
It lies in, as you said, in the number of people who are caught and the casualties that we'll see. And if that increases, the balance goes towards fear and worry that this is going to make life even more difficult for Iranians who just experienced the biggest massacre in their modern history. So this is really what we've seen on the 12-day war as well. As it went on and more people were impacted by it, the public opinion started shifting towards wanting it to end. And in these footage, we see people even sort of watching, not far away from Riyadh. There are some videos that people are saying, where was hit? And then somebody answers, the Supreme Leader office was hit, and they kind of carry on. This could change as it intensifies. We got early word from Tehran, just the first hour, somebody saying there was a number of people who were injured brought into one of the hospitals, and they're kind of overwhelmed. So given the internet is already limited and the access to a lot of pictures is going to be limited as well, it's going to take some time to get a sense of the impact of these attacks on ordinary Iranians and their daily lives.
Thank you very much indeed, Bahman Kalbasi
from BBC Persian in New York. Well, let's just cross back live, if we can, to Barbara Asher, who is in Doha. And Barbara, I just wanted to come back to you. We heard those explosions behind you. We're now getting witnesses telling Reuters that there have been a new wave of bombs heard in Doha. What more can you tell us? Apologies for that. We've lost sound on Barbara. We're going to try and get Barbara back if we can, but we just heard in the last few minutes a new wave of missile bomb booms, so explosions have been heard in Doha, not necessarily bombs, which I said earlier, and that's according to witnesses who have been talking to Reuters. We've also been hearing from a number of airlines in the last few minutes or so who have diverted or cancelled flights to the region. In the last 5 minutes, I've just seen that Emirates, the airline, has said that it's now, for now, cancelling all its flights to and from Dubai. I think we can go back to Barbara now, who I hope we can hear. Barbara, tell us about those booms heard in Doha in the last few minutes.
Yeah, the booms that we've been hearing during the morning, the Qataris are saying that they are intercepting missiles being fired by Iran into Qatar, presumably the target being the military base here. And the Qataris have said they have shot all the missiles out of the sky and that there hasn't been any damage. I haven't heard any reports of casualties here either, unlike in the United Arab Emirates where they're saying one person has been killed so far. So it seems as if the Iranian missile strikes are continuing, and Qatar, as well as the other Arab countries in the region, are vigilant with their interceptors, firing the missiles as they come in. Again, we're going to have to wait and see throughout the day what sort of damage has been created and whether there are further casualties. But at the moment, the Qataris and others are in taking defensive action.
Okay, Barbara, thank you very much indeed. Let's cross lines now to David Willis, who is in Washington. And David, what's the reaction been so far from the US?
Well, as you can see behind me, Mariam, the sun has yet to rise here in Washington, D.C., but Americans waking up to the news of those strikes on Iran and to Operation Epic Fury, carried out at the command of a president who basically had campaigned on a pledge to get America out of so-called forever wars. Indeed, this president was critical of one of his Republican presidential predecessors, George W. Bush, for his involvement in the quagmire that became the Iraq conflict. Well, now he has launched a massive and ongoing operation, as he put it, in the early hours of this morning in Iran, and he has done so without any word of approval from Congress, without running this by Congress. And we've already heard from Republican Congressman Thomas Massey. He is a critic of Donald Trump's, it's fair to say, but he characterized this on social media as acts of war unauthorized by Congress. There are others. The Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, a close ally of Donald Trump, who have praised the action of the last few hours, saying that it will make America safer in the long run. But there are a lot of Republicans who will not want to see the United States get drawn into a prolonged conflict in the Middle East, Mariam.
David, thank you very much indeed for that. And thank you to all of our correspondents who have been updating us from around the world. We'll bring everyone back shortly for more. But now let's cross live and speak to Sebastian Usher, who joins us now. Sebastian, talk me through, first of all, the implications of what has happened today. I know it's difficult because the implications could potentially be huge and it's difficult to predict. But we're hearing now in the last few minutes that blasts have been heard in Riyadh, Doha, Abu Dhabi, across the region. This is going to have serious repercussions, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, I think it's clear that this is a conflict, an attack by the US and Israel with a more open time limit on it. Essentially, the goals that President Trump laid out are different from what we heard during the 12-day war in June, when it was about Iran's nuclear capabilities. This involves its ballistic missiles. He says it's going to obliterate its navy, so essentially to destroy Iran's military capabilities, but also his call for the people of Iran essentially to rise up. So though he didn't say it, and the Israelis haven't said it in so many words, regime change. The response we've seen from Iran is therefore to be seen in that context. What we didn't see, again, last June was any concerted effort to attack these other regional countries. I mean, these essentially at the moment seem to be attacks trying to target US military bases in the region, but that brings those Gulf countries far more directly into the arena of conflict here, so we'll have to wait and see how they will respond beyond this. We'll have to wait and see, as we've been hearing, whether Iran is actually able to inflict any serious damage on US military capabilities and whether it will widen those attacks. We'll also have to see if Iran's proxies in the region, which have all been weakened substantially over the past year and a half, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, proxies in Iraq, etc., whether they will intervene in a way that they didn't back in June. That's very much part of Iran's plan. This is an existential battle for Iran's leadership. Also, of course,
however many times you strike Iran, there has to be, most people agree, there has to be some sort of movement from within the country to progress things further, to progress them in the way that President Trump was intimating, regime change. That's not going to happen with a few missiles being aimed at the country.
I don't think that, obviously we've seen the very start of this campaign. I think this looks like it's going to be a substantial campaign over potentially many days, potentially weeks. That was, again, a similar feeling at the start of the war back in June. That finished after 12 days with essentially a kind of mission accomplished from President Trump, saying that Iran's nuclear capabilities have been put out of action. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. But as I say, this seems more open-ended, again, without explicitly saying it. It seems to be operating on a number of fronts, both the nuclear side of it, which, to be honest, in the talks that have been taking place, Iran had made some concessions which might have answered those issues, but this goes far beyond that. It goes to the ballistic missiles, some of which Iran is firing at the moment towards Israel and towards Gulf countries in the region, but also its wider military capabilities and its very existence. Again, President Trump called on the called on the Iranian people to rise up, but told them for now to stay in place, not to risk their lives. There'll be a hope, I'm sure, in Washington that there will be a start of defections within the regime, within its huge apparatus. Now, at the moment, there's no sign of that. I think it'll be some time before we ever get a sense of that. I think many analysts will believe that that is a very, very difficult obstacle to get across. These are groups of Revolutionary Guards in particular that have a huge stake in the way that Iran has been run over the past decades. They will not give that up lightly, and they will not start, I think, any large-scale defections if they feel that their own existence will essentially be put at risk by doing so.
Okay, Sebastian, thank you very much indeed. And we are going to just leave Sebastian there momentarily. We're showing you live shots from various parts of the Middle East. I want to bring you a line that is coming to us in the last few minutes from the UK. The meeting of the UK's government's emergency COBRA meeting has now concluded. That's a COBRA meeting which we said would happen in response to the attack. The Prime Minister is now expected to have a series of calls with allies over the coming hours. We also have been hearing from new blasts, boom blasts heard in places like Riyadh, in Doha, in Abu Dhabi, and we're also hearing in the last few minutes from Kuwait that there has been significant damage to a runway at the Kuwait base, which is hosting Italian troops. So significant damage to a runway at a Kuwait base hosting Italian troops. And just to give you a line from Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, she has in the last hour or so expressed through her office solidarity with Iran's civilian population, saying it continues to demand respect for civil and political rights. The office adds that Giorgia Meloni will consult and regional leaders to support efforts to ease tensions. That's the latest line from there. Well, let's cross live now to Cairo and speak to Dr. H.A. Hellier, a Senior Fellow in Geopolitics, International Security and Middle East Studies at the Royal United Services Institute. Thank you so much for joining us. And if I could ask you, first of all, for your reaction to what we've seen today. We pretty much expected this to happen at some point. Did you expect it to happen now, and did you expect it to happen in this way?
Thank you very much for having me on the program. The Omani foreign minister went onto American television yesterday precisely to point out that negotiations had gotten to a place where it was possible to see a deal that would work when it came to nuclear enrichment, uranium enrichment, and nuclear weapon. So this is clearly not about that. I think that the American president made it very clear in his video on Truth Social some hours ago that he's looking for regime change. The Israeli media has been reporting over the last few hours that Israel is trying to take out senior Iranian officials, including the supreme leader and the president. So this is not simply about the nuclear negotiations. If anything, I think the region will see the focus on the negotiations over the past few weeks to have been a sideshow in order to allow for preparations for this attack to take place almost irrespectively of those negotiations. So,
well, given the similarity between what's happened now and what happened in June, right? Mid-negotiations, missile strikes by Israel, and we are again mid-negotiations and these strikes by Israel and the US. You'd expected Iran to have been ready for this, no?
I think that they were as ready as one can be, in the sense that what we've seen over the past 4 hours are these vast waves of retaliatory strikes. It's retaliation against countries in the region, though, and that, I think, is going to complicate matters tremendously for Tehran. They're not going to have mediators aplenty that are going to be looking to help them in this regard. On the contrary, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on many of these Gulf states to actually cooperate with the Israeli-U.S. attack. But having said that, I think that what you've seen over the past few hours is that the Iranians were, I won't say waiting for this moment, but they certainly seem far more prepared as they did last time because of the number of strikes that they've attempted throughout the region, on not just on Israeli targets or within Israel, but also across the GCC. And I think that that's going to escalate things even further.
We've heard in the last few minutes the Iranian foreign minister telling counterparts from Saudi Arabia, from UAE, Qatar, Kuwait and Bahrain and Iraq that it will use all its defence and military capabilities under the legitimate right of self-defence. Obviously that clearly stating how far Iran is willing to go, but how far can it go, do you think, given its capabilities?
So Iranians view this as an attempt for regime change. So they view this as existential. And all of the messaging that you've seen out of Tel Aviv, the Israelis, and Washington, D.C. and the Trump administration makes it clear that that's probably how they should view it. The question is what they can do to actually push back this attack. And their capacities are not going to be directly against the American homeland, for example. It's too far away. But they will strike using their allied proxies or allied militias on the ground, as they've tried to do so before. And this is going to take the escalation a lot further. Are they going to be able to inflict the same sort of damage on the Israelis and the Americans as in reverse? No, not at all. But that's not really their play, I think. I think their play is to try to make this as painful as possible
for the U.S. and for the Israelis in order to apply then political pressure from surrounding countries and the international community on the Israelis and the Americans to stop. Whether or not they're going to be able to achieve this is very unclear.
Okay, well, it is very unclear. The next few hours and days, hours, weeks will be so important. Dr. Hellier, it's been good to speak to you. I thank you so much for your time. Well, here in the studio, I'm joined by Mikey Kay, military analyst from the Security Brief on BBC News. Mikey, it's good to have your expertise on this programme, because I wanted to ask you about that line that I spoke to Dr. Hellier about. We've heard now the Iranian Foreign Minister saying to counterparts from those regional neighbours that Iran will use all its defensive and military capabilities under legitimate right of self-defence. But how far do these capabilities go? What has Iran accumulated, and what can it do damage-wise? What damage can it inflict, and how long can it keep it going for?
I mean, the damage can be conventional military capability, so it could be ballistic missiles. We've spoken a lot about ballistic missiles, and when you were speaking to Barbara there in Doha, you could hear some booms, as you're calling them. I think it's important to say that that boom could be a Patriot or a terminal altitude area defense missile intercepting a ballistic missile, but it could also be the cracks of the missile going, dropping a sonic boom. The THAAD missile systems travels at Mach 8, and the Patriot travels over Mach 1. So when it accelerates off the rail, it will drop a sonic boom. So that thud could be that as well. Conventional capability, you've got the ballistic missiles. We haven't spoken about the hypersonics. Hypersonics are really interesting, and that we've seen no evidence that Iran has launched hypersonic missiles yet. But it does have two that should be of concern. The first one is the Fatah-1, which goes hypersonic in the terminal phase. Hypersonic means greater than a speed of Mach 5, which is 5 times the speed of sound. Fatah-2, that's potentially got a hypersonic glide vehicle, so it makes it really hard to intercept. Then you've got the asymmetric side. The asymmetric side is interesting because of the proxies that are in the region. They can go after asymmetrically these bases and other targets. I think the Iranians do have a broad bandwidth of capability to be able to strike.
Mikey, thank you very much indeed. And we did get those pictures, didn't we, that I was asking for. These pictures showing us the current situation in Wakra. We can see smoke in the background, billowing up from buildings in the back of the city. Let's cross live now, though, and bring ourselves back to the UK, because as I mentioned earlier, that Cobra meeting, which had been convened in Westminster because of the strikes in Iran and the wider region, has now finished. We can speak to Matt Cole, our political correspondent, who joins us live from Downing Street. Matt, just bring us up to date with what we've been hearing from that Cobra meeting.
Yeah, we understand that meeting has now finished. A Cobra meeting is so-called where it takes place. While we have obviously number 10 Downing Street here, just away to our left are what are known as the Cabinet Office buildings, and in their Cabinet Office briefing room A, Cobra is where these meetings take place, hence the name. Now, we understand that meeting has now broken up. It was chaired by the Prime Minister himself. Normally, sometime after these meetings, we often get what's known as a readout, gives us a summary of what might have been told in it, maybe a short few lines about what was agreed, discussed or decided. We haven't had that yet, but what we have had earlier today was a statement from here in number 10 in which the government says Iran must never be allowed to develop nuclear weapons, and that is why we have continuously supported efforts to reach a negotiated solution. We understand obviously the UK did not participate or have its bases used in this action. The government statement says we don't want to see further escalation into a wider regional conflict, but we're also told in that statement that as part of what the UK government calls its long-standing commitments to the security of our allies in the Middle East, we have, the government says, a range of defensive capabilities in the region which have recently been bolstered, and crucially the statement says we stand ready to protect our interests. So now the meeting has concluded, we understand the Prime Minister will be holding a series of calls with allies throughout the afternoon, but no word yet as to what was actually decided or discussed here.
Okay, Matt, thank you very much indeed for that update from outside Downing Street.
Well, let's speak now to Shashank Joshi, the Economist's defence editor. Shashank, so grateful for you to join us. Thank you so much. And clearly we are reacting moment by moment to what we've been hearing. But if I can just get your analysis of where you think we are so far, and more importantly, I guess, where we're going to be heading in the next few hours, days, and potentially weeks.
Yeah, good morning. I mean, there's three big differences here from last year's strikes by both America and Israel. The first one is the scope of this campaign. This is now very, very clearly a war of regime change. And regime change may not be an explicit aim of the strikes, but it is to create the conditions for regime change. That is what we heard from Trump. That's what we heard from Benjamin Netanyahu. That's very, very clear. And there are risks associated with that in terms of the tension between a short war that Trump seeks and the fact that regime change can take a long time. The other differences, I think, are also that Iran's retaliation has been much faster. I think they took about 18 hours to respond last year to the first Israeli strikes, and this time the response has come initially against Israel within hours. And the third, and I think very, very important difference, the third difference here is that the Iranian response is much broader. We have already seen confirmed attempted strikes against Bahrain, where the US has the headquarters of its Fifth Fleet, against the United Arab Emirates, against Saudi Arabia. Now, many of these may have been intercepted, but Iran has a lot of missiles within reach of those shorter-ranged territories across the Gulf. And that makes this very, very different from last year.
I know a lot of people watching this and listening to it at home are going to be asking this question. How serious is this? Where is the off-ramp here for all of those involved? We're getting retaliatory strikes from Iran. We'll get potentially more action from the US and Israel. Where is this going to end, and how bad will it get?
First of all, there's no off-ramp. This is not a diplomatic process whereby America and Israel are striking Iran in the hope that it sees sense and does a deal. That ship has sailed. We're now going to be looking at multiple days of heavy, sustained American-Israeli bombing of Iran. Let's be very clear. They're not waiting for Iran to offer a deal anymore. I believe they have already tried to kill the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the Iranian president, senior IRGC leaders. I don't know if they're dead, but I believe on the basis of evidence we've seen so far that they have been targeted, and we could find in the coming hours that senior Iranian leadership have been assassinated, have been killed. And this will continue as Iran and America strike missile sites, nuclear sites, political leadership, bases, ports, all manner of things. Now, Iran will respond to the best of its ability because it knows there's very little to hold back now. There's very little to lose by trying to go after these targets. And Iran's aim here, I think, will be attempting to make sure they can kill Americans in some of these bases in the region. Because if you do that, you impose a political cost on Donald Trump. And while you can provoke him, you might also force him to think, hang on, I don't want this to last for weeks with more Americans dying 6 weeks before midterm elections. So I think in the coming days, we will see more Iranian launches, more attempts to try to strike those bases across the region. And the key question is, can America and Israel identify those missile launches and destroy them on the ground, and then intercept the incoming missiles that are fired to a sufficient degree that avoids heavy casualties? And right now, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll be watching very closely for the evidence of any Iranian success in these Bahrain strikes, these Saudi strikes, these Emirati strikes in the coming hours.
And let's talk a little bit about that Iranian leadership and the potential for it to have been taken out. We don't know yet what's happened. We believe that the leadership, as you mentioned, has been targeted. What would be the next steps then if those targetings have succeeded? Where is any kind of regime change, which clearly has been made clear by President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu is what they want to see happen? Where is that going to come from, Shashank? Because it seems extremely unlikely, given how repressed the opposition has been in Iran for 47 years, that it's going to come from within the country, unless, of course, the military have a hand in it.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting tension, isn't there, in Trump's statement between saying he wants the Iranian people to topple the regime, saying you won't get this opportunity for another generation, and his message to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, who of course are the kind of Praetorian guard of the regime, they're a parallel military in effect, and he's saying to them, put down your arms and I give you immunity. So the question is, how can you offer the military immunity at the same time as encouraging the people to sweep away the regime, the IRGC, and all of this? There is a natural tension here, I think. But what I see in both the Trump and the Netanyahu statements is a sense that we want regime change, but the people who deliver it will have to be the Iranian people on the ground themselves. And perhaps, I've heard some reports of American officials talking to Kurds in the border parts of Iran, in the periphery of Iran. I think you will see an Israeli and American effort to encourage the opposition to rise up in mass protests again and sweep away the regime once the bombs have stopped. But there is no guarantee that will succeed. And I think one possibility here is the Iranian regime comes out of this with its leadership killed, with its missiles stockpiles destroyed and degraded, but surviving and able to say, we are surviving, we won't do a nuclear deal, and we're going to be around for another 30 years. And I think that would pose a really significant political challenge to Donald Trump and to the Israelis.
Let's talk a little bit about global reaction now, because we've heard obviously from the UK. We've also heard from Australia, who have come out supporting US efforts to send missiles to Iran. But it's been more muted from other areas. We haven't really had a huge number of global leaders coming out and supporting the military action per se. Supporting the Iranian people, yes. Supporting the potential for there to be some sort of regime change, and of course supporting the efforts to stop nuclear proliferation in Iran. But it's interesting, isn't it, how different countries and nations are reacting to this. And I'm not talking about Arab neighbours, I'm talking about, in particular, Western countries.
I think that's right. I noticed Kaja Kallas' statement. She's, of course, the foreign policy chief of the European Union. And her statement, I read it as effectively being all but backing these strikes, saying we don't like the Iranian regime, we don't like what they've done on supporting armed proxies in the Middle East, on their nuclear program, on attempting to kill dissidents in Europe. Iran has made a lot of enemies in Europe. But nonetheless, there is also concern, I think, about the legality of these strikes. And I did notice with interest the Norwegian foreign minister saying very clearly he thought this was illegal, this was in violation of the UN Charter. So I think you will see splits in Europe, and countries which really don't want to take part in these strikes, both because they're concerned about the legality and because they don't know the end goal here. They don't know how this ends. But they're not sad to see the Iranian regime humbled, a regime that has tried to kill dissidents in Europe, that has tried to conduct assassinations in London, in Paris, elsewhere. I think in private, and some of them in public, will be fairly happy about this. And of course, here I recall the words of Chancellor Friedrich Merz of Germany, who said, I think last year, Israel is doing our dirty work for us. And that statement prompted quite a lot of outrage, you could say, in some quarters. But he was also saying what many people were thinking amongst Europe's leadership in private.
Well, let's talk, if we can, about Russia and China. We've heard from the Russian foreign minister describing the US and Israel's actions as reckless, saying they violate international law, calling for a return to political and diplomatic solutions. China hasn't said anything so far, but we do know that yesterday it told its citizens to evacuate Iran as soon as possible. What role potentially could these two powers have in what's happening here?
Actually, very little. I think that they, of course, have the capacity to do a lot if they want. They could send arms shipments to Iran, they could militarily intervene, but that won't happen. Russia, of course, is preoccupied in Ukraine. It doesn't have spare capacity to deal with this issue, although it is a partner of Iran. There's quite a lot of distrust between the two sides, and Iran is aware in the last 6 months Russia hasn't done a great deal to help rearm Iran after its losses last year. China, of course, a very important economic partner of Iran, has relied on Iranian oil, so the energy component is interesting there. But actually, again, China does not have a long history of really getting involved in the Middle East in a serious way. You know, it's been involved in diplomacy, it's been sending statements, but I fully expect China to make these comments while sitting broadly on the sidelines, focusing on its main interest, which is how do we ensure this continued supply of energy from the Middle East that we need to keep the Chinese economy running.
I know it's difficult for you to answer this question, Shashank, but what do you predict will happen over the next few hours and days?
I think we're going to see more waves of strikes. Don't forget, these come in waves. Israel sends planes. Those planes have to come back. They have to be refueled. They have to be rearmed. And then they go back. we'll see that. We'll see a higher tempo of US attacks because, of course, the US is launching attacks from this vast fleet it has around in the Middle East, including cruise missiles. But we will also begin to see, I suspect, US aircraft going near or above Iran, letting off some of their own air-to-ground missiles. And then we will see Iran continue to try to get through American and Israeli missile defenses by trying to saturate them, trying to keep the salvos coming, in the hope that they can, as I said, draw blood, extract a political price from the United States for this operation. That will continue, I think, throughout the rest of this day. I think it'll continue throughout the rest of this weekend. This is not going to be, as we saw with Operation Midnight Hammer, the US strike last year, an in and out, one day and done operation. This is going to be with us for a bit longer than that.
Tristan Joshi, Economist, Defence Editor. It's been so good to get your analysis. Thank you very much. Well, this is the scene in Qatar. This is Wakra, Al Wakra municipality in Qatar. It's on the eastern edges of the shores of the Persian Gulf. And a short while ago, when we were keeping an eye on these pictures, we saw plumes of smoke from those booms that we were reporting on earlier on BBC News. A new wave of booms heard across the region. And remember, we've also been hearing in the last few minutes or so from the Iranian Foreign Ministry, who has pretty much said to Arab neighbours that Iran using all its defensive and military capabilities under legitimate right of self-defense to protect the integrity of Iran. Well, let's get a little bit more now on what is happening in the air, in particular what's happening with flights, because we've had a lot of information coming into us about airlines cancelling flights, airlines having to tackle closed airspace. BBC Business correspondent Mark Ashdown is in the studio with me. Mark, what are we hearing?
Well, picture the scene last night. British Airways flight BA123 took off on time at 8 o'clock from London Heathrow heading for Doha. Just a couple of hours into that flight, though, the pilots were ordered to turn back. The 200 or so passengers on board found themselves just a couple of hours later back on the tarmac in London. That was one of the first. By 6 a.m. this morning, the flight tracking service, Flight Radar 24, showed there's normally a stream of aircraft crossing over Iranian and Iraqi airspace. That had dried up. Flights were diverted across the much safer Saudi Arabian airspace instead. And we've been speaking to all the major airlines this morning. They say they've diverted or cancelled many flights to the region, citing safety, of course, and apologising to customers. I'll give you a flavour. Virgin Atlantic cancelled its service from London Heathrow to Dubai. Also warned flights to the Maldives, India and Saudi Arabia could have longer flight times because of rerouting. British Airways cancelled flights to Tel Aviv and Bahrain until Wednesday. And today's service to Amman is grounded too, and Wizz Air confirmed it suspended all its flights to and from Israel, Dubai, Abu Dhabi and Amman with immediate effect up until including next Saturday. Flights also to Saudi Arabia cancelled until Tuesday, so major disruption in what is a very congested airspace anyway.
Absolutely, yes. These routes we're talking about here are extremely busy, and particularly they're busy over a weekend as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, they are following the regulators' advice. The authorities, the European Union and Aviation Space Agency, want all aircraft to avoid crossing that airspace above Iran and Iraq at all altitudes. The UK Civil Aviation Authority also warning passengers who plan to travel to the Middle East to regularly check with their airline before leaving for the airport. And the UK Foreign Office has hour-by-hour advice on visiting any country around the world. Just in the past hour, it's updated that it has added Kuwait to the list of Middle Eastern nations where British citizens have been advised not to travel. That includes Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, Turkey, Saudi Arabia and Oman. The advice to British nationals there is, I quote, due to reported missile attacks across the region, British nationals should remain vigilant, follow local authority advice and take shelter if advised.
So if one was planning a holiday in any of those places that you have just mentioned, what should one do now? Contact the Foreign Office, go online, look at information? What's your advice?
Well, in the first instance, contact your airline who you're due to travel with. regular contact with them. You can get advice from the UK Foreign Office, so that's hour by hour updated. In terms of compensation, if you can't travel, there are very strict rules around that too, but it is a very unusual situation. Ordinarily, if a flight's cancelled, the airline has a duty to put you on the next available flight it can find, even with another airline to get you there. But I guess when the entire region is shut down, that's not possible. So again, the advice there for passengers is you should be entitled to some money back, some compensation potentially. Do contact your airline in the first instance. They should contact you, really, and advise you. There's also advice online, places like Scissors Advice, to get on top of your rights so you can get that compensation.
Mark Ashdown, thank you very much indeed for all of that advice and that update as well. Well, let's just bring you up to date with what we know so far, and that is that earlier this morning, Israel and the United States launched missile strikes on Iran. They say they've targeted military and political...
A classic request? Call or text Christian
on various cities and regions of the country. And since then, Iran has launched a wave of retaliatory strikes against many of its Arab neighbours as well. We can see some live pictures now of Qatar. These are live pictures of Qatar, and you can see in the sky small plumes of smoke where missiles have passed by. The pictures are a little bit shaky, apologies for that, but this is Al-Waqra, which we showed you a little bit earlier. We've had lots of reaction in the last hour or so. As I mentioned, in the UK, that Cobra meeting has just ended. There's the reaction from other parts of the world as well. In particular, in the last few minutes, we've heard from Hamas in Gaza. It's condemned the US-Israel aggression, as it calls it, against Iran. We've also had reaction from other world leaders, including the EU Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, who has said that the European bloc has adopted extensive sanctions in response to Iran's murderous regime. The Russian Foreign Ministry has described the US and Israel's actions as reckless. And also in the last few minutes, as we've heard, there have been a wave of booms heard in various countries and cities, including Riyadh, Doha and Abu Dhabi, as Iran continues its retaliatory strikes. It says these strikes are a legitimate right of self-defense. That is the statement that Iran has issued to Gulf states. This is
RNZ News at 1. Morena, good morning. I'm Vicky Mackay. The United States and Israel have launched a massive joint attack on Iran with the aim of regime change. US and Israeli military sources have confirmed that the targets include both military assets and individuals, such as the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. CNN's Nick Patton-Walsh has more.
We don't have clarity from Iranian side or the Israeli side of the likely death of any of their particular targets here. Now, that will take obviously hours for solid confirmation and verification to indeed emerge, and it is utterly startling to have this Israeli admission that part of their onslaught here was essentially decapitation, the removal of Khamenei and other senior figures, those linked, it seems, to the missile program as well.
One missile has hit a square where the former Iranian president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, is reported to live. A security analyst, Mickey Kay, says the US has been sending Tomahawk land attack missiles over Iraq and into Iran. He says these cruise missiles, known as TLAMs, are usually launched from submarines or destroyers and have a range of more than 1,600 kilometres.
It can put a penetrator head on the tip, which means that it can be used against installations that are underground, so command and control nodes. It can be used against surface-to-air missile systems, and it can be used against airfields which have aircraft on them. That's called OCA, offensive counter-air. And what that means in terms of military doctrine is that you try and strike the aircraft on the ground before they get airborne.
Mickey Kay says the Tomahawk missiles are likely to have been fired from the General Ford Carrier Strike Group, which the US had earlier positioned in the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, the military actions prompted a wave of flight cancellations across the Middle East. Iran has launched retaliatory missile strikes, apparently aimed at US air bases in the region, and explosions have been heard in Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain and Kuwait, as well as northern Israel. More than a dozen airlines, from Air France and British Airways to Qatar Airways and Turkish Airlines, have suspended or cancelled services to and from the region. At home, a 65-year-old man has been remanded in custody after appearing in court over a serious stabbing in central Auckland. 2 people were injured in the attack in front of the Central Library, that's the Central City Library, on Friday night. The accused appeared in the Auckland District Court yesterday on 2 charges of causing grievous bodily harm. No pleas were entered, and Justice of the Peace Karen Avery granted him interim name suppression. More than 100 people have gathered at St Matthew's Church in central Auckland for a meeting on solutions to homelessness in the city. It comes after the government announced its controversial move on orders last weekend. Anne-Marie Searchfield from community development organisation Lifewise told the crowd vulnerable people will be pushed further away from help and trust will be further eroded. Auckland City Missioner Helen Robinson, Daniel Legale from the community food provider Sunday Blessings, and Auckland Central MP Chloe Swarbrick also spoke at the event. To sport and its Super Rugby results, the Brumbies beat the Blues, the Brumbies at home, 37-27 last night. The Chiefs were beaten at home by the Crusaders, 43-33. And the Hurricanes on the road to Fiji and Lautoka, and Fijian and Drua dispatched the Hurricanes 25-20. And that's the news.
Take an art critic, a practicing artist, on a run study Māori to an art event and explore their response. Presented by Ngāhuia Te Awi Kotuku. Part of our very being is this need to show off. Brett Graham.
I mean, that's the most vital thing for me, is to see how hungry this generation are for their taha Māori.
And 24-year-old Kura Turuwhenua.
Never had a boil-up pie before, but I rate it.
Made with support from the Creative New Zealand, New Zealand On Air, and RNZ Arts and Culture Podcast Co-Fund. Follow and listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Short forecast from mid-service to midnight Sunday, the very first day of March. And thank you very much, Peter, for reminding me that the Ides of March is the 15th, not the 1st. Just in my head, it seemed like doom. Northland, partly cloudy with a few showers, thunderstorms possible this afternoon and evening. Auckland, Waikato, Bay of Plenty, Rotorua, Coromandel, Taranaki, Taumarunui and Taihape. Partly cloudy, scattered showers in the west, spreading everywhere this afternoon, then clearing in the evening. For Taupo, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a fine morning, then a few showers for afternoon with thunderstorms possible inland. For Whanganui to Wellington, also Wairarapa, mainly fine with isolated showers this morning, then rain spreading north this evening. For Nelson and Buller to Westland, cloudy periods and a few showers. For Marlborough and Canterbury, rain spreading north today, possibly heavy. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, a period of rain this morning followed by showers. And in the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd shower turning to rain this evening, again possibly heavy. I'll have more news and weather again at 2 on RNZ National 101 FM. If you've just arrived home from a late Saturday night and are wondering what's going on, RNZ National 101 FM is covering live world-breaking news from the BBC after the US and Israel launched attacks on Iran. Retaliatory strikes have been launched by Iran. RNZ News will report on the hour, as we have been. Regular rnz.co.nz programs are currently being held while we give you this live broadcast this morning. We turn now to the BBC.
Total immunity, or you will face certain death. Finally, to the great, proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. Stay sheltered. Don't leave your home. It's very dangerous outside. Bombs will be dropping everywhere. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will be probably your only chance for generations. For many years, you have asked for America's help, but you never got it. No president was willing to do what I am willing to do tonight. Now you have a president who is giving you what you want. So let's see how you respond. America is backing you with overwhelming strength and devastating force. Now is the time to seize control of your destiny and to unleash the prosperous and glorious future that is close within your reach. This is the moment for action. Do not let it pass.
Well, let's cross live now to John Donaldson in Jerusalem, David Willis in Washington, and Barbara Plett-Usher in Doha. Let's start with you, John, in Jerusalem. And we've heard from Benjamin Netanyahu that in his eyes this attack is to remove an existential threat to Israel.
Yeah, and that's a message he's been saying for frankly years, if not longer. He clearly thinks that Iran is a problem for Israel that needs to be got rid of, and today it does seem like America and Israel are taking steps to do that. When you listen to that message from President Trump a little earlier, what he was talking about there is when this military operation is finished, he wants the Iranian people to rise up and take over the government. They want regime change in Iran, saying that this was a sort of once-in-a-generation opportunity. Here in Jerusalem, all morning really, we've had the sound of sirens going off, loud explosions directly overhead our hotel in Jerusalem. I looked up to see what appeared to be a missile or projectile being shot down by Israel's missile defense shield a couple of hours ago, and further to the west in the big cities of Tel Aviv and Haifa on the coast, also explosions there. So Iran's retaliation has very much begun. How extensive and how long it will go on for, well, we're just going to have to wait and see.
And we've heard from an Israeli official that the Iranian Supreme Leader Khamenei and the President Pezeshkian were both targeted by Israel. What more do we know about that?
Much. The Iranians are saying that neither of them were hurt. We understand that the Supreme Leader has been taken to a safe place away from the capital. That's what's coming out of Iran. Certainly that is a pretty big step. You know, if Israel and America are trying to decapitate the Iranian regime and remove the Supreme Leader, that is a huge move, really, which is going to bring an enormous response from the Iranians, one would imagine. We had that war last year, lasted about 12 days between Israel and Iran, and then we had a strong response from the Iranians. We had casualties here in Israel, and, you know, depending on how long this operation by the Americans, by Israel in Iran goes on, we're going to have to wait and see what the extent of the Iranian response is going to be this time. Their military capabilities have been hugely diminished in recent years because of those various conflicts, but they still have the capacity to hit all parts of Israel pretty hard.
John, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's cross live now and speak to Barbara Plett-Usher, who is in Doha for us. And Barbara, we've been hearing about booms across Doha, explosions being reported around the region. Talk to me a little bit about that, and also about the fact that some of these Arab nations have, in the last hour or so, said they reserve the right to respond as well.
Yes, in fact, we just heard another round of explosions here echoing across Doha. The Qataris are saying that they have intercepted several waves of missiles now. Up until just a little while ago, they were saying there has been no damage so far. They have sent out push alerts to our phones, to the phones of everyone in Qatar, telling them to lay low, to seek shelter, and to stay indoors. And the traffic on the roads have not entirely stopped, but it has reduced quite significantly. We are hearing similar reports from around the region, from the United Emirates, Kuwait, as well as Bahrain, saying that they are getting incoming Iranian missiles and that they are intercepting them, except in the case of Bahrain, there was an announcement that the missile had hit the U.S. Navy base there. That's the U.S. Fifth Fleet base in Bahrain. Again, the extent of the damage there not entirely clear. In the United Arab Emirates, the government said that one citizen had been killed, apparently from falling debris, although that is not entirely clear either. And you're right. Some of the governments have said they reserve the right to respond. I think that they would calculate very carefully about what impact that might have and whether it would suit their interests to do so. This is exactly the outcome that they have been trying so very hard to prevent over the past weeks, trying to mediate between the Iranians and the United States.
warning about the dangers of a conflict in Iran, warning that it could spread to the region and destabilize it. It's clear now that the Trump administration has not listened to its Arab allies' public efforts anyway on this issue, rather to, it seems, its Israeli allies. And so the Arabs are going to be watching very carefully and taking whatever measures they can to prevent the conflict from destabilizing the wider region.
And it's interesting you say that, Barbara, because in the last few minutes, Oman's foreign minister has said that they are dismayed after the attacks between Israel and Iran. So as you mentioned there, a lot of effort has gone in, particularly by Oman, to try and mediate some sort of agreement between the two sides. And while that effort was taking place, clearly planning was kept going for these attacks.
Yes, and the Iranians had expressed skepticism all along, and even now when the attacks took place said, look, we expected there would be attacks. You've attacked us before during negotiations, but we went along with them anyway. And so they were making preparations as well, having very little faith in the whole negotiating process. But the Omanis who were mediating, that was the place where the talks were taking place, did pull out all the stops. The Omani foreign minister having gone to the United States on a sudden trip this week to try to urge the administration to continue with the negotiations and saying that they were making significant progress. He called it a breakthrough. He said that the Iranians had agreed that they would not that they would move all their stockpiles of enriched uranium out of the country, that this was a really important move and that it could be built on over a period of time to actually get an agreement. Again, that intervention failed. The planning for this military operation has clearly been in place for some time, and now President Trump has decided to go ahead with the aim of regime change, which is frankly the most drastic outcome that could have been the case. There was questions about what an Israeli U.S. military operation might involve. Would it be limited strikes to kind of force the Iranians further along in the negotiations? Would it be strikes on just military targets like the ballistic missiles sites, the nuclear sites? But no, Mr. Trump has made it clear that they're going further than that, and again, that is a source of concern for the Arab neighbors or the Arabs in the Gulf, because who knows what will come afterwards, and whether they will be subject to flows of refugees and weapons coming across the borders if the worst-case scenario comes true.
Barbara, thank you very much. Barbara Usher in Doha. Let's cross live now and bring in David Willis, who is in Washington for us. And David, bring us up to date with what more we've been hearing in terms of reaction from Washington.
Well, it's a little after 7 o'clock in the morning here, Mariam, and Americans are waking up to news of this major operation in the Middle East, Operation Epic Fury, carried out on the orders of a president who, of course, campaigned to spare this country from so-called forever wars, and who was openly critical of one of his Republican presidential predecessors, George W. Bush, for the immersion in the conflict in Iraq that the United States became involved in. Well, that same president who criticized his predecessors for their inaction has now staged this massive and ongoing operation, as he called it in that video address this morning, going to the lengths of saying that this could lead to American casualties, and doing all of this without the approval of Congress. And indeed, just after word came of that, the start of that operation in Iran, Republican Congressman Thomas Massey, true he has been a critic of Donald Trump's of late, categorized the action in Iran as acts of war unauthorized by Congress. There are others, like the South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, who have applauded this operation, even though he has warned too of the possibility of American casualties. But I think a lot of Republicans, even those who support this operation, will not want to see a prolonged conflict in the Middle East.
David, thank you very much indeed for that, and thank you to our correspondents in Doha, Barbara Usher in Jerusalem, John Donaldson and David Willis in Washington. Thank you to all of you.
Let's bring you some video now that's coming to us at the BBC, and this is video of some of those strikes in the Arab nations. This one is in Bahrain. It's one of several countries which have been hit. Just keep looking at this picture. For those of you who are not looking, it's a picture of a building. You can see a low-rise yellow beige coloured building. The camera's moving towards the left and the right, and you can see just after that there's a plume of smoke in the background, and this is the building that has been hit as far as we know. We know that this is a missile strike. This has been filmed by someone on the ground, and it's pretty unusual to get footage like this. It's a different view that you see. Look at the explosion there. The explosion in the background of this picture, and a thick grey plume of smoke rising from these buildings in Bahrain. And we're beginning to get more and more of these videos of these retaliatory strikes across the Middle East. We're going to see that one more time, that explosion, that missile which has hit Bahrain, one of several Gulf nations to have been hit. We'll try and bring you more information on these strikes as and when we get it here on BBC News. Well, let's take a moment now to assess where we are with our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who's with me now. And Lise, you were in Iran very, very recently. How prepared do you think Iran was for these this length strikes?
They talked a lot about it. They ramped up their rhetoric. As we are seeing today, they didn't wait, as they did during the 12-day war, to consider what their response would be to Israel's strike. They were taken aback. They were surprised by the Israeli strike. That's why so many security chiefs were literally killed in their beds, because in the middle of negotiations they weren't expecting an Israeli strike. This time, I kept hearing from officials in Tehran, we're not going to be surprised this time. We are ready. Are the people ready? Iran doesn't have the air raid sirens or the bomb shelters that the people of Israel are now depending upon to keep themselves safe. There had been a report that the mayor of Tehran was preparing underground shelters, but they were trying to downplay this. The New York Times did a piece about this, and they quoted officials saying, we don't want to cause panic by telling people they have to prepare for the possibility of a strike. So many Iranians would have, there was no reports of, in the recent days, of people panic buying or stocking up, although we did hear from Iranians saying some of them had kind of grab bags just in case they had to flee somewhere else for greater safety. You'll remember, Miriam, last year that millions fled Tehran once it became clear that the missiles would be hitting residential areas, and certainly already in these early hours of this is a major military operation which is only just beginning, that civilian areas are being hit, including the residence and offices of the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. There was a report earlier, very difficult to confirm, of course, that he has been taken somewhere else.
Let's talk a little bit about the regime in Iran, because they see this as an existential battle, right? It's a 47-year regime, fully entrenched in every way with Iranian society and politics. How difficult would it be for Iran potentially to extract itself from this regime? You hear from President Trump talking about regime change. How easy is that, though, in reality?
Is it Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel and President Trump made it clear in their statements this is not just about nuclear, not just about ballistic missiles. They're part of the objectives, but the objectives are to change the regime. You've been broadcasting that statement by President Trump saying to Iranians, take shelter now because their bombs will be dropping, but when it is done, and who can say when it will be done, that they should just seize this once-in-a-generation opportunity to change the order in Iran. It's very difficult, Mary, as you know, to establish just how much support the authorities still have. I think it's clear that the support they have has been draining away. There are still the elite Revolutionary Guard Corps. There's the Basiji, the volunteer militia. They were set up specifically to defend the Islamic Republic, very ideological, very much committed to hardline, committed to the regime. We saw no evidence, of course we didn't see everything, but in those really extraordinary months of January, when the security forces used lethal force, unprecedented lethal force, to put down the protests, causing tens of thousands of casualties. There will be many thousands of deaths. It's still being counted. That the regime has lethal force and is willing to use it. So there will those who will fight to the last breath. Will there be others who will be willing to do a deal? As you know, the former Crown Prince who lives in Washington has been saying for some time, Reza Pahlavi, that there are tens of thousands, up to 50,000, he said, members of the Iranian security forces who had defected and had joined via a portal. There was never any evidence provided for that, and there was some skepticism. But in moments like this, where a great shift seems to be underway, some will decide to fight and some will decide to flee. President Trump, of course, says lay down your arms and you will be given immunity, and if you don't, you'll face the consequences.
What do you think is going to happen next? It's so hard to predict, isn't it?
We can't say. We just don't know. We've not seen this. This is truly a Middle East war. Look at all of the capitals this morning which have already been hit. Compare that to the 12-day war where Iran launched dozens of missiles at the U.S.'s biggest military base in Qatar at the very end. Now we are not even, it's not, half a day is not yet done, and already so many areas have already been hit, and this is just the first day of what clearly will be an operation which will take many days, if not longer, to unfold.
And we've had lots of lines coming into us. In particular, I think we've had someone from Oman, one of the mediators from Oman. Of course, they spent a long time trying to sort some agreement out between the US and Iran, urging against the conflict and warning this is not your war to the United States. That's what they're saying. This is not your war. Of course, President Trump very much considers this now his problem.
There's been some criticism in the United States that, unlike, say, for example, George W. Bush in the run-up to the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in 2002, George W. Bush traveled the country, used microphones in many capitals to make the case for war. In retrospect, it turned to be based on fabricated, on false intelligence, but he felt the need, as an elected politician and commander-in-chief, to make the case. Many were expecting President Trump would do that in the State of the Union address that he made last week, but he used vague generalities and accusations. Now, in that 8-minute video that he posted on Truth Social, he talked about an imminent threat to the United States, a direct threat. There would be casualties, but this was important because this was for the generations to come. Israel, in launching this attack, called it a preemptive attack, which suggests that Israel and the United States thought there was an imminent threat, but there is no evidence that Iran was preparing to carry out an attack either against Israel and American interests in the region. And even the case that was made by President Trump that, of course, it's very, very difficult to know completely what is happening in Iran now, but the best intelligence assessment said that they hadn't started enriching uranium again because significant damage had been done to their main enrichment sites. And even though President Trump had accused Iran of working on intercontinental ballistic missiles, which could hit the United States, the general intelligence assessment is that if they are working on it, they are still years away from being able to actually build that kind of a missile and build them in sufficient quantities. So we'll have to wait to see whether more evidence is provided. There are already concerns being raised as the legal justification for attacking another country. I don't think this is certainly isn't at the top of the mind of Israel and the United States, who are making the case that Iran was a direct threat and they had to deal with it.
Well, we've heard actually in the last few minutes that President Macron of France has called for an urgent meeting of the United Nations Security Council. Let me take you back to your recent visit to Iran, because people watching this might be thinking, oh, there'll be terrified people in these cities in Iran, fearful for their lives, angry at the US and Israel. But actually the reality is there will be also plenty of people inside the country who welcome this, because they see it as their potential opportunity to get regime change, something that many people inside the country have wanted for many, many years. How likely is that to happen happened, do you think? And did you feel when you were there this groundswell of anti-establishment feeling in Iran?
It's very difficult to establish what the groundswell is. As you know very well, Iran is a vast country, Iraq and Afghanistan combined, and even greater than that. And more than 90 million people. Our last visit, we were just in Tehran. But there was a distance. Of course, we see there was a very different mood from when we were there the year before. We arrived on the day of the ceasefire, and there was a kind of let me say, rallying around the country, cementing Iranian attachment to their country because it had come under attack from Israel and the United States. This time, we felt the very, very still raw anger and pain after what happened in January. So many lives lost, people breaking down in tears when we asked them, what is your main worry? And saying, why did so many young Iranians have to be killed? Why did they use such force? So grieving the loss of loved ones. And for the first time ever in all the many years I've been going to Iran, there were people who said, no one likes their country to be attacked. I believe I've got nothing to lose now. I'm desperate for change, and the only way we can really bring about change is by external support, by American airstrikes. But equally, there were also many who said we don't want another war. We are already reeling under so many pressures in our lives. It would be too perilous, too unpredictable, and we have been hearing as the speculation grew that an attack was imminent, there was a growing sense that people in Tehran and in many other cities were on edge, fearing the worst, not knowing what to do, where to go, what would happen to their own lives. I really felt, Miriam, on this visit that Iran, it was a different country, and that Iran was at a crossroads and pulling in different directions.
Okay, Lise, thank you very much indeed. Lise Doucet, our Chief International Correspondent. Well, let's just bring you up to date for the next 1 or 2 minutes on exactly what we know so far, and that is that earlier on today, the US and Israel carried out airstrikes, a joint attack on Iran. They struck multiple